Hello. So recently I was reading about data warehouses and data lakes. Afterwards, I happened to be doing my dishes and I realized that the difference between data warehouses and data lakes could be understood through dishes as an analogy. So in this video, I am going to go over that analogy and I hope it makes the difference clear. So, let's say you finished a delicious meal. You've had something in your plate, you've had something in a bowl, you've had something in your cup. Now the food is gone, but the residue on the dishes remains. The dishes are not clean. Well, what do you do? Well, there are two options. One is you can take those dishes and throw them in the sink and just leave them there. The next time you need dishes, you go to the sink, you grab whatever you need. You have to look through the dishes that are there and find whatever you need, the plate, the cup, etc. You have to clean those dishes, and then you have to dry those dishes, and then you can use them. So it's easy up front to just throw dishes in the sink, but then you have more work to do later whenever you need the dishes. Now, the other strategy is you have your dishes, they're dirty. What do? You actually, rather than throwing them in the sink, you take them, you clean them, you dry them, and then you put them in your shelf. So then when you need those dishes later, you just need to go to the shelf and the dishes are all nicely organized. The cups are with the cups, the bowls are with the bowls. So it's easy to find them. They're also clean and they're also dry, and you could use them directly. So here you have to put more work up front, but then you have to put in less work later when trying to get the dishes you need. So this is actually similar to a data lake and a data warehouse. In fact, a data warehouse is like a shelf, and a data lake is like your sink. So let's start with a data warehouse. A data warehouse is effectively a collection of tables with schemas. So whenever you are trying to insert data into the table, that schema takes effect. Whatever row you're inserting into the table must abide by the schema. For example, if a cell is said that it can't be empty, it can't be null, then you have to make sure it is not null. If you're writing, for example, a country name and the schema says, hey, the country name must be one of the countries within this list, then you have to make sure that the country name that is written that you're trying to insert is not misspelled or anything like that. If you have, for example, a date attribute, and that date attribute says it needs to be in a certain format, maybe year, month, day, then whenever you're inserting into that table, you need to make sure you are following that format. So effectively, it takes effort to make sure that your data that you're trying to insert into the data warehouse follows the schema. But you benefit from it later. Because whenever you run SQL queries later, they're faster for two reasons. One is that you don't have to clean the data. It's already clean. And second of all, the data it will be stored in a columnar format. Basically, that means that there are tables and each column is stored together. The second column is stored together. Third column is stored together. And that makes SQL queries really fast because it doesn't for example, when you are selecting three specific columns, the engine only needs to go to where those three columns are stored. It doesn't need to look at places where other columns are stored. Now, while the queries are much faster, the disadvantage of data warehouses is that the cost is generally higher. Why is that? Well, the cost is higher because you're not only storing tables, but you're also storing table schemas on top of that. And there is added compute where whenever you are inserting, some compute needs to be done to make sure that the data being inserted is following the schema. So let's get into data lakes. So data lake is basically a collection of files. These can be CSV files, JSON, Parquet, images, videos, text files. And note that there is no schema. So basically, for a lake, you can effectively throw in any data you want in there and no checks are performed. It's kind of like a sink where you can throw any dishes in there and you don't have to do any upfront work. But then you pay for this later on in that whenever you want to access or extract data from a data lake, you then have to clean the data when accessing it. But one advantage here is that data lakes are much cheaper than data warehouses because they don't have the compute where the compute is performing schema checks on inserts. And they don't have the added cost of having to store schemas with files. And I just wanted to finish on one example of each. So an example of a data warehouse is AWS Redshift. And an example of a data lake, is AWS S3. As S3, you can just throw in any sort of file.